What's going on, guys? In today's video, I wanted to address some of the comments that I'm seeing in either my videos comment section or others that's just saying that Monsters and Memories is a reskinned EverQuest or an EverQuest clone, or why are you playing this when you could be playing EverQuest? Those kind of comments and stuff like that. And, you know, there's a good amount of them. And I figured we can kind of just go over some of the historical elements of some RPGs and stuff like that, and just to see what's really going on here, and hopefully bring some light to the situation. I don't typically take down notes and stuff in my videos. I like to just go off the top and kind of just keep it natural feeling. But this is kind of a lot of information I got that I kind of want to squeeze in here, and some dates and stuff. So you're going to see my eyes drift sometimes as I try to stay on target and keep to the main focus of the video, so we can try to keep it down in time, because that's something I'm not very good at. My videos are typically longer than they need to be. So I want to start out by going over some of the obvious stuff that everybody should probably kind of figure out on their own, but you know, based on some of the comments, I don't think that's necessarily true. So obviously these are two different games made by two different teams, and although Shawn is a lead member of the Monsters and Memories team, he did work on EverQuest back in the day, from Velius through the Omens of War. In fact, most people on the Monsters and Memories team are huge old school EQ nerds, and also, you know, WoW Classic and other MMO nerds. They have a love for the genre of game. Now, these two games are different from each other, just like Adrelon Online is different from EQ, Monsters and Memories is different from EQ, or Adrelon Online is different from Monsters and Memories. They're all very similar, but they have their own styles. They're bringing their own unique things to the genre. Now, a long time ago, you used to hear, and it's easy to say, things like World of Warcraft ripped off EverQuest. You know, you might have heard that a long time ago, stuff like that. You see very similar things between the two games, just something that's extremely obvious. And this isn't, you know, unique to EverQuest by any means, but for instance, you know, EverQuest was a big three-dimensional MMORPG of the time. WoW came out after it, and so they both have paladins. Paladins both have, you know, healing spells. They both buff you offensively and defensively with like AC buffs, etc. They both have lay on hands. Like, I think one's called laying of hands, and the other's called lay on hands. They both resurrect. Hell, they both even have a free mount, right? Like you get a free mount. Like in World of Warcraft, you get a mount at level 40, and then you can quest for an epic mount at level 60. But I think you have to put in like 100 gold or something on the 60. But it's basically, you know, basically free compared to other classes. And then in EverQuest, when the alternate advanced system comes out, which was still before World of Warcraft, when that system comes out, you can get a free mount as a paladin through that system. So, you know, did they steal that from EverQuest? Or did both WoW and EverQuest take inspiration from those games that came before them? Because EverQuest wasn't the first in the sense either. They may have been the first three-dimensional or something like that, if you want to say that. But I have some dates here now. Tolkien, you know, wrote his stories, The Lord of the Rings. He wrote those between 1937 and 1949. We're talking the 30s and 40s. And then they were originally published. The three-part series was originally finished and published in the years of 1954 and 1955. So very, very long time ago, right? And that's all the Lord of the Rings and everything that encompasses that. Now, it's not to say that Tolkien invented elves and stuff like that, you know. Yeah, he took inspiration from Norse mythology and whatnot, but he definitely did reshape them to be what you and I know them as today, and the entire world. What the elves that the entire world know today came from his reshaping and his vision of, you know, what he drew his inspiration from. So You know, he did invent some things though. Like I believe he invented the hobbits, halflings, right? He invented orcs. He didn't invent the word orc, but he invented, he turned it into a race and gave it a history and all that kind of stuff, right? World of Warcraft uses orcs, EverQuest uses orcs, EverQuest uses halflings, so on and so forth. So then you fast forward a little bit, and in 1974, Dungeons & Dragons comes out, and they take basically inspiration from Tolkien's work, and they turn that into a tabletop game that you can play with your friends, RPG games. Dungeons & Dragons, you know, they just further gamified it, if you would, and they came out with the Holy Trinity. I believe that's where the original Holy Trinity came from, that we still know of today, that pretty much every game uses today, which is the healer, the tank, and the DPS. And you kind of need, those are the three essentials that you need to form a group. And, you know, they really flushed out a lot of the classes and further used, you know, the races from within Tolkien's work and all of that. And you fast forward again to like 1980, you start seeing these MUDs coming out, and then the MUDs went through their progression, and then that's leading you into the mid 80s, and from the mid 80s to the mid 90s, you've got you started getting home entertainment systems. So you started getting, you know, some of the arcade units. They started making home entertainment systems where gaming became more casual for people to have inside their homes. So you had like the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, the SNES, the N64, the PS1 from the mid 80s up to the mid 90s. And so when that happened, you started getting, you know, RPGs started going into the digital age basically. And, you know, there's a slew of RPGs. We all know the Final Fantasies and the Chrono Triggers and everything. So, and they took inspiration from those that came before them, right? And then PCs by the mid 90s, PCs started becoming, you know, a little more common. They became smaller, cheaper, more powerful, and more. By the mid 90s, they became, you know, the internet's out now, and it just became more possible for more families to have like a computer in their house by this point. So PC gaming started picking up around this point. Not to say it didn't exist before this, but it started becoming more common, okay? And so you started seeing the Warcrafts, the RTS, you started seeing the ARPGs like Diablo. You started seeing, and then you just keep going, and you started seeing Ultima Online, EverQuest, RuneScape, Final Fantasy XI, Star Wars Galaxies, I believe in like 2002. And even with some of these, you had like the so-called classless systems, some of them, like RuneScape and Ultima Online. And then you had like Star Wars Galaxies, where that was more of a futuristic approach. But even though you had the classless and the futuristic approach of some of these, it's really hard to not see that they took inspiration from those that came before them. We can use Star Wars Galaxies, you know, as like an example, where they did have a medic, which is your healer. They did have a brawler, which is your warrior fighter tank type. You know, they did have a marksman, which is like your ranged DPS, kind of like an archer. You know, obviously it's different, but you see where it's coming from. And then they had a scout, which is kind of like a rogue, if you will. It's kind of like your rogue. And you could see that they took inspiration. Obviously, it's got a major Star Wars twist on it and all of that, but that's because the game isn't set in a Middle-earth time. The game is set in the future, in space, with planets and stuff like that. But nonetheless, you can see where they're taking their RPG tropes and bringing them in to the futuristic game. Not all games are taking place in there. There's a lot of games, especially with RPGs, are taking place in like a Middle-earth-esque setting. So let's get to like the topic of the video. Really, is Monsters and Memories just a copy of EverQuest? Again, I see these comments in videos all over YouTube and everything like that. You know, like the literally just go play EQ comment, or the MnM is a reskinned EQ. And you know what's funny about that comment, about the reskinned comment, is that even if that was true, that would be amazing. That would be absolutely amazing. Ask any EverQuest player, and all they want is a, like, you know, they're talking about EverQuest 3 coming out, and it's like, scratch EverQuest 3, just come out with an HD remake of EverQuest 1, and that would be massively successful for their company, right? Their company's not like doing the hottest compared to, like, say, you know, some of the gigantic companies nowadays, the big AAA gamers and stuff like that. They don't have to have some insane success to feel successful. Now, with that being said, we can say that about WoW as well. Everybody's seen on YouTube, probably, if you played WoW, the Turtle WoW had the trailer that's now taken down by Blizzard, which was on YouTube, about Elwyn Forest that's redone in Unreal Engine, and it just looks insane, right? Elwyn Forest and just everything redone in Unreal Engine. It just looks absolutely awesome. Everybody's losing their shit over it so much. Blizzard, you know, took their trailer down. You have like Lantern EQ, I think it's called. In fact, Zukan, part of the MnM team, did some work for Lantern EQ, you know, updating visual effects and stuff like that. So there are trailers out there on YouTube where you can see the world of Norath redone in Unreal Engine, and it looks amazing, and everybody loses their shit about it. So, in fact, Diablo 2, right here, they just recently, I mean recently as in a couple years ago or whatever, they came out with just an overlay. It's the exact same game. You can turn off the graphics at the click of a button, and then turn them back on at the click of a button. It's just an overlay of you know, modern graphics on top of Diablo 2, which completely reinvigorated the Diablo 2 scene. Now, maybe you do or maybe you don't know of Mr. Llama. He's like the biggest Diablo 2 guy on YouTube. He went from like 50k subs to like over, like, I don't know, I think he's like over like 200k subs now, or something like 300k. I don't know where he's at, but massive increase. And that was all because of the hype and everything that came from just updating the graphics of Diablo. That's all they initially did, was upgrade the graphics of Diablo 2. And not just Mr. Llama, but all the Diablo 2 guys just saw a massive bump in popularity and you know, foot traffic and all that kind of stuff. So to leave a comment like, oh, it's just a reskinned EQ, like that's an insult or like that's a bad thing, you're out of your mind. If that were even true, which it's not, then that would be a massive success as well. But anyways, kind of, you know, got off topic there a little bit. But that would be a big time W for sure. So big time W, if that were true, but that's not true. Monsters and Memories is an MMORPG in its own right that's set in the Middle-earth-esque environment that Tolkien, before everyone, you know, kind of set up for us, using the same typical races, the same, you know, typical class setup as the brilliant Tolkien setup before everyone, for everyone. All Middle-earth-esque games use this. If you know, if all of these games that are kind of like in the medieval setting, but also incorporate magic and all of that kind of stuff, they're all based on this. One more thing I do want to mention though is that one more time, the Monsters and Memories team does have Shawn on it, who came from EverQuest, from Velius to Omens of War, and like I said earlier, there's a bunch of people on the team who are big-time EverQuest nerds, big-time WoW nerds, and not just those, but you know, big-time nerds of MMORPGs in general tend to go and play other MMORPGs along the way, and you draw in inspiration from all of these MMOs, but of course, you're going to draw your biggest and most inspiration from the juggernauts of the scene, right? EverQuest was like the first very successful three-dimensional MMORPG, and then you had EverQuest follow behind it, and World of Warcraft follow behind it and completely dominate the scene. And so naturally, you're going to take elements from those games that you love when you're creating your art piece. They're creating their art piece, they're creating something that they want to play themselves, and they're putting, all of that into it. And, they're going to take feedback, but they have a mission, they have a vision, they have a goal, and that's what they want. These guys met each other, correct me if I'm wrong, these guys met each other playing on EverQuest, and semi-recently too. I mean, the project's been going for about 5 years, but I believe they met on Aerodune, the TLP server. They play with each other on P99 server, and they do all of stuff, so they're big-time EverQuest nerds, so naturally they're going to take a lot of inspiration from that. But that doesn't mean it's a clone. We've already gone over this now throughout the years, how everybody's taken inspiration on that because before them. It's just like Kobe took inspiration from Jordan, Luka Doncic took inspiration from LeBron James, so on and so forth. It's just how life works as we progress through our timelines. One more thing to mention is Monsters and Memories is still in alpha. There's still more alpha to go, there's still more alpha playtests, then there's going to be a beta, then there's going to be early access in first quarter of 2026, and then early access is going to last quite some time, roughly maybe 1 to 2 years, roughly, and at which point there will be a 1.0 patch. So there's plenty of stuff subject to change between now and then, and there's going to be plenty of additions between now and then. So they're not done. This is just the base of the game. There's still a ton more to come. Now let's talk about some specific differences between, since the subject matter is EverQuest and Monsters and Memories. We can leave out, some of the other MMO RPGs. This is specifically about these two games. So we can say, what are some differences between these two games? So one of them is trade skills. The trade skills in Monsters and Memories really nothing like the trade skills in EverQuest. In EverQuest, you don't go out and gather resources from nodes like you do in, say, World of Warcraft. There is no, you don't go out and gather ore nodes. You don't go out and go skinning animals, picking herbs or flowers, that kind of stuff. In fact, the trade skills in general in this game, there's going to be more than double the amount of trade skills that are in EverQuest. In EverQuest, if you need some ore for blacksmithing, you go and you farm a mob. You go and kill a mob, and the mob drops the ore that you need. You don't go harvest it in the open world. So, Monsters and Memories, you go out and you harvest ore, you harvest wood, you harvest flowers or herbs, that kind of stuff. You bring them back to town and you work on your trade skills. And again, there's going to be more than double the amount of trade skills than you see in that of EverQuest. In EQ, your spells never leave you. You die in life or in death. Your spells are always on you. You can always remem them from your spell book. Your spell book is part of your naked character, basically. In Monsters and Memories, your spell book is a physical item. If you die, that is on your corpse. You are left with nothing. You are literally pretty much naked. And you can't mem your spells again. Now, I'm not asking you to agree or disagree with this right now. I'm just saying it's a difference. So when you die, you got to get back to your corpse with no spells. Now, there's ways around this. You could always have a backup spell book somewhere, like in your bank, and you can mem some spells off of that and then go get your corpse. You don't need the spell book on you to at all times. You just need it to mem your spells. You can put it back in the bank and then run your naked ass to get your corpse, in which you can get your main spell book back. Somebody can drag your corpse to the entrance of a dungeon, so on and so forth. So, that's a pretty big difference, and it's a bit controversial right now, but that's not the subject here. The subject is it's different. The vendoring system, that is different. In EQ, you have greedy vendors who buy low and sell high, but you also have regular vendors who buy regular and sell regular. Charisma will also affect the prices of this in EverQuest. In Monsters and Memories, you have greedy vendors who buy at a decent rate and sell at a decent rate, but they don't buy at the highest rate, but they do sell at a decent rate. So they're in convenient places like newbie yards. So, so players that are out leveling, that don't want to spend the time to go into town and to sell to vendors, they can just, offload everything to the greedy vendor and keep on going. You can make money off of this, off of players who don't want to spend the time doing it, by buying stuff from the vendor in the convenient places, and then running that into town and selling it to the vendors that actually want that stuff. The armor vendor specializes in armor, sells armor, so he will pay you more for armor. The weapons vendor specializes in weapons, sells weapons, he will pay you more for weapons, so on and so forth. Now, there's typically a marketplace in a zone. Most vendors are there. You can just make a quick route. You just stop by the inn. You got the cooks in the inns and so on and so forth. Yes, it may take you a little time to learn where all the NPCs are, but once you do learn that, once you learn the world in which you are living in, it will only take you a little bit of time after that to go into town and sell everything. You know, people make wild claims like it takes 2 hours, it takes 30 minutes. No, it doesn't. It takes a few minutes. I've got, you know, some videos on that as well. It's very, very quick if you just take a second to learn. So, charisma also takes effect in Monsters and Memories, but then on top of that, Monsters and Memories also has a commerce skill, which the more you will and deal, you can increase your commerce skill, which also affects your pricing and everything there. Naturally, EQ's lore is only going to apply to EQ. WoW's lore is only going to apply to WoW, so on and so forth. So Monsters and Memories has its own lore, and we're going to get a peek of this on top of what we have so far, which you can basically learn by reading stuff, by going on the website. The game's not even out yet, so you can go to the website, you can learn some stuff. If you get in on the alpha tests, you can go around and talk to NPCs, and you can learn some stuff. But on top of that, we're going to get our first peek into the future of Monsters and Memories lore when they come out with their first update, which is going to be about the Deep. The Deep is where some of the darker races come from, which is slated to have deep elves, dwarves, and gnomes, which are a darker version of their counterpart. The deep elves have been said to, you know, basically be dark elves. And Shawn said, you know, the term is interchangeable. There will be a capital city underneath the earth where they dwell. That's going to be really, really cool. Underneath the ground is a complete system called the Deep, and it's going to have these 3 races and a city and zones and all that flushed out, and obviously they're going to come out to the top, but that is just the first block of extending the lore of the game. So that's going to be really cool. Obviously, EverQuest is 25 years old. They've had 25 plus years of building lore, so obviously it's going to be richer. This game is in alpha. I know I've said this, it's not even out yet, so their lore is very small to start with, but it's going to build over time. You have to allow that. It's just like, I'm not supposed to be bringing up other games here, but it's just like World of Warcraft. They had a lot of lore to build off of. They had Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, and their expansions, and then Warcraft 3. And then those were basically, so when they hit the ground running with World of Warcraft, they had all of that lore to blow through. And then once they blew through all that lore by Wrath of the Lich King, they had to start writing new lore. And it's kind of like the same thing, right? Here, we're going to start fresh with brand new lore going forward. Now let's talk about the combat. This video is getting long, so let me try to just run through this, and I think my point is kind of there, but let's talk about the combat, because the combat's a big one. The combat is, in these games are all about combat. It's a big one. So the combat is slow and methodical like EverQuest. It's definitely not like fast, fluid, and Zerg. It's not Zerg-like, right? So mana and health regeneration is very slow. You got to be intentional with your attacks and your spells while you're in your group. And even though it shares this trait with EQ, the slow methodical trait, many of the melee or the physical classes take quite a bit from World of Warcraft, not from EverQuest. So let's talk about that. In Monsters and Memories, you do get your toolkit much, much earlier than, say, in EverQuest, which is really nice. You really feel like your class early on. You feel your class identity really early on, because you get some of the, in EverQuest, some of the spells that really make you feel like, okay, now I feel like a necromancer. You know, you might not get some of those spells until later on. Whereas in Monsters and Memories, you get them quite early, and you really, like an enchanter has charm nearly right away. You know, you're at level 5, you're in a group, you're already charming stuff, you're already being an enchanter, you're already doing the things enchanters are known to be doing. So that feels really good. Now there are a ton of classes in both EverQuest and Monsters and Memories, so we're not going to go over everything, you know, here, because we're already 30 minutes in, right? So what I will say is, let's start with some of the classes that EverQuest doesn't have. First, though, we're going to start out with an archer, which maybe is not unique, but it's a class that EverQuest doesn't have, is the point. So we got an archer. EverQuest and Monsters and Memories do both offer a ranger, which is a hybrid of a fighter and a druid. Or in Monsters and Memories case, since they do have an archer, it's a hybrid of a fighter, druid, and archer. But Monsters and Memories does offer a strictly an archer. And the archer specializes in range attacks, but does not have the magical spells that of a druid, like a ranger would have. The archer is kind of similar to that of a hunter in World of Warcraft, minus the pets and the pet spells. Now, some of the more, you know, some of the things that you don't see in too many of the other games is we got like an Inquisitor. So an Inquisitor is a hybrid of a fighter and an enchanter, and they play as an anti-mage / tank. They have your standard melee tanking abilities, but on top of that, they also have magical protections and shields as well. They have tools to go along with that, like Mesmerize, Silence, Dispels, Mana Burns, and short-acting charms. So that's much different than anything you see in EverQuest. A hybrid of that sort. You have another hybrid in the Spellblade. The Spellblade is like a leather-wearing fighter that also has access to magical effects of an elementalist or a wizard. They enchant their blades with magic and strike in melee combat. They rely on weapon procs to feed their ability to nuke their enemies and benefit from the spell shields and barriers, invisibility, root, nukes. And interesting take on a battle mage type. So those are some classes that, whether or not they're unique to Monsters and Memories, they're classes that EverQuest doesn't have when comparing EverQuest to Monsters and Memories directly. So when it comes to the caster types are pretty identical to that of EverQuest. You know, they have all of the same classes that EverQuest has, plus more. And again, they're in alpha, and they've said that they're not done. There's more. They have ideas of additional healing classes that they want to come out with eventually, but they got a lot to do now. But there's some ideas bouncing around for the future for additional classes. Specifically, there's a couple of healer classes bouncing around Nick's head. So something I just wanted to get out there. But when it comes to the same caster classes as EverQuest has, they are pretty identical. There are some differences though. Like a Necromancer, I've been playing a Necromancer as well. And the Necromancer, I've noticed the lack of a life leech dot. So Necromancers are known to have a lich ability, which drains their life to increase their mana regeneration. But one thing I've noticed that EverQuest has that Monsters and Memories doesn't is a life leech dot that counterbalances that. So you still have life taps, which is a nuke that will return life, but they don't have a dot that you can just leave on that really... So it's going to be interesting balancing the lich line in Monsters and Memories, that's for sure. A couple things about the hybrids. They want to work out a system with rangers where they have various magical imbued shots. So a ranger can have like elemental shots, fire arrow and ice arrow. Kind of reminds me of Zelda Ocarina of Time, where you got the different arrows, and you know, they serve different purposes depending on like what you're fighting. Maybe it's weakness to a certain elemental type or something like that. Paladins, I have some experience with a paladin. The paladins have some abilities that don't cost mana. They have a restorative smite, which is an attack that deals damage, but then also heals yourself, like on the attack. And it's on a cooldown, I don't know, it's a short cooldown, something like 6 seconds or so. They also have a shield toss, which is like World of Warcraft. I think World of Warcraft Paladins got it in the Wrath of the Lich King, where you throw your shield and it can bounce off of 3 targets and it silences them. It's very good for pulling. If there's if there's a group and there's a shaman in the group, and you know when you pull, he's just gonna stand there and he's not gonna come with the melee mobs, and he's just gonna be casting on you. You can throw the shield, hits all 3, silences them so that they all come into the group. It's a very useful trick. Paladins also have kick, in the sense of an interrupt. So, something they didn't have in EverQuest. They also have an interrupt kick. Shadow Knights in Monsters and Memories, they have auras. So, they're very much like a paladin, in the sense of a paladin has auras, which they didn't have in EverQuest, now that we're talking about it. But the Shadow Knights also have auras as well. So, some of the hybrids, little differences there. But I think the biggest and the main differences when it comes to classes are the melee classes. We all know in early EverQuest, melee had it really rough compared to that of casters. It wasn't until a couple expansions go by and you get suited and booted and you get all the gear that drops, later on in later expansions, that melee actually start catching up with casters. In Monsters and Memories, although the combat is still slower and methodical like EverQuest, they introduce a lot of abilities that are from games the likes of like WoW. So we can go over some of that quickly. Warriors have various shouts and debuffs, which are things you see from a barbarian in Diablo or a warrior in World of Warcraft. Definitely not something they have in EQ. They have different stances, like in World of Warcraft. They have like offensive and defensive stances. They have charge, they have stuns, they have a fear, they have a frenzy. All of that is stuff that you don't see in EverQuest for warriors. Rogues have ambush, which is a harder or a more damaging backstab that requires stealth. Rogues have stuns. Rogues have a sprint cooldown. Rogues have an evasion cooldown. Rogues have a magical evasion cooldown. They have sap. They have vanish. A lot of that. Although the combat feels like EverQuest, a lot of these moves come from games like World of Warcraft. Monks have offensive and defensive stances as well. I don't know where you see that for monks. Maybe the different no, not even. I was gonna say maybe the different specs in World of Warcraft when they come out with monks, but not even. So monks have the different offensive and defensive stances that also, so they have an earth stance that changes the type of damage you deal, but plus it helps mitigate incoming damage. And then you have elemental stances, basically. I think there's a fire stance or something, and that'll change your damage type again and give you different offensive abilities that are imbued with that. I don't know too much about monks, but I do know that. And they also have a sneak ability. They have kicks. They have feign death. They have interrupts, and they even have a taunt, which you don't see monks with a taunt in EQ either. And they can use their defensive stance. So they do, they can be an off tank for some time. So this video is running extremely long, but I kind of just wanted to go over, all of these MMOs. I'm sure there's tons and tons of stuff that I left out of this video. Let's start with that. But hopefully I communicated, that MnM is not a direct, reskin of EverQuest. It's ridiculous. It's not just a copy of it. All of these games took from someone before them. And when it goes all the way back to books, then it goes to Dungeons and Dragons, which is a tabletop, has nothing to do with any sort of technology or anything. It's just a tabletop game. They really flushed out a lot there. Then you saw the MUDs, which, started out with text-based and, advanced forwards. Then you started seeing, graphical implementation with some of the at-home systems, early PC builds, so on and so forth. And it's just gotten there, So they've taken inspiration from all of this stuff before them. And of course, they've taken inspiration from some more than they've taken from others. That's quite obvious. Again, MnM is still in its infancy. It's still in alpha. There's still a lot of change and growth to happen. Just allow that to happen. They haven't, let me just remind you, they haven't taken a dime from anyone. So, you know, stuff is going to change. They start getting a little money coming in. Stuff will start improving. Stuff will start moving. People like to compare it to Pantheon. Pantheon took a ton of money up front and then ended up being kind of stagnant. Monsters Memories has taken zero. I was big on Pantheon too. Like, I'm not shitting on Pantheon. I was big on Pantheon in the mid to late 2000 teens, but it just didn't work out. So, I mean, they're still trying. They're still trying. But Monsters Memory has taken $0. They've used half the time as, say, Pantheon. They've done, in my opinion, more already than Pantheon with $0. So when they do start getting a little bit of money coming in, they can update that. And, you know, the team is so passionate. They're all streaming. Not all of them. A great number of them are streaming constantly. You can go on Twitch, you can go on YouTube, you can just watch these guys. You can see the passion that they bring to the project for $0. They're doing all of this after their 9 to 5. You could see the passion, you could see the love, you could see that they're MMO nerds, you could see that they're drawing. You could actually talk to them like, hey, how'd you become part of the team? You know, what's your history with MMOs? What's your history with this? And you can see they came from Dungeons and Dragons. They came from EverQuest. They came from World of Warcraft. And so they're bringing that in and they're creating their art piece with their vision. I just think people are so harsh and are so, you know, sometimes they get so emotional about things. And it's not to say that I'm emotionless. This is emotion as well, but, you know, just try to stay level-headed. I don't know what else to say. Just try to stay level-headed about it, and don't bring the negativity, you know. Just stay positive. If you don't like something, move on and find something to be positive about, right? That's just a message that I can give in general. It has nothing to do with video games or anything. That's just life. There's a ton of games out there that are fast-paced, that are solo-friendly, have copious amounts of quality of life in them. And if that's more of your thing, if that's what you want, don't come over to Monsters and Memories and be negative about their vision. Just go to those games and enjoy yourself. Like, you don't need, not every game needs to be for you. There's dozens and dozens of MMOs that are constantly coming out. You don't have to like all of them. Like I've said in this video, I was big on Pantheon at first. It didn't go the way I wanted. I left and I attached to Monsters and Memories a little more. Monsters and Memories was always on my scope, but I didn't want to get, you know, I didn't want to get my hopes up too much, too early, like kind of like I did with Pantheon. But I'm not out there like commenting on Pantheon videos, like I hate this game is trash. I'm not making videos dissing Pantheon, even though it might seem like I am a little bit here. I'm a backer of Pantheon, so I own Pantheon. That was part of my backing. I got the game for free. And I do, you know, play it here and there a little bit. A couple of my friends got into it recently. And, you know, they're making progress and they're making work. It's just you know, it is what it is. I'm digging on Monsters and Memories right now. And I'm kind of rambling here at the end, but we're still in alpha. Early access is coming. It's gonna be a year or two before patch 1.0. If you don't want to play then, that's perfectly that's perfectly fine for you. Play whatever you like. If you're more of the type who wants to wait for the 1.0 to come out and to play a fully flushed out game, that's perfectly fine. You can do that as well. They're gonna come out with fresh servers when the 1.0 patch does come out, which isn't gonna be for like 2 years from now, around there. So, you know, you can just kind of like, you know, pay attention to it, but be doing other things, playing other games. That's perfectly fine. You can come back then and you'll have a fresh server where you start on a level playing field as everyone else. So you don't have to worry about that. I'm sure there will be other people. Everybody loves a fresh server. WoW, EverQuest TLPs, whatever it is. Everybody loves fresh servers. So those are going to be popping off even when they come out a little bit after early access. But I digress. Either in alpha, in beta, I don't know, maybe I'll get in early access, or in patch 1.0, I will see you out there. And if I don't see you out there until that 1.0 patch, I will see you in the next video.